Hello and welcome to another episode of The Classical Republican. Today we are interviewing Dr. Jacqueline Abernathy, a gubernatorial candidate in Texas with the American Solidarity Party. She is a wife and mother in San Antonio, has her PhD in public administration, and has been passing laws for the last 20 years. Jackie, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So first question, what is your version of the best form of government?
I love how that is, such a specific question and not at all broad. But I would have to say that in order to have a broad answer, I am a belief in classical republicanism. Yeah, it works out, didn't it? I believe in the rule of law. I'm afraid of the tyranny of the majority. And in fact, it's become abundantly clear how important it is to have the rule of law rather than the rule of the people. When you've seen all of the lynch mobs that have happened over especially the last 10 years or so. And it's not that I cry myself to sleep at night when a racist gets coming to them, but it does disturb me that anytime someone is involved in any kind of a public shaming or whatever, the masses descend upon their employer, everything, and can essentially ruin their life. I like the fact that in republicanism, okay, yeah, people are mad. You did something that perhaps you shouldn't do. Well, you have the right to a trial. You have the right to defend yourself. You have some recourse and options. And you can't just be, have your head on a pike because you happen to anger a majority of people. And what also comes to mind is, are you familiar with the case of Lindsay Stone about 2012, happened around 2012? She was on a trip. She was a disability rights worker that was on a work trip. And she was at Arlington National Cemetery, and there was a sign that says, be quiet and respectful. And so she flipped the bird and acted like she was yelling as a funny joke, because she took pictures of herself smoking in front of a non-smoking sign, and they'd see a statue, she'd mimic it. So she didn't mean anything by it. But when that picture got in the hands of somebody that was very mad about it, it became a viral overnight, fire Lindsay Stone, tens of thousands of people. Her life was ruined, essentially ruined. There are people that still track her down just to make sure that she's not happy, not employed. She's afraid. She was unemployed for a long time. She's afraid that any job she gets, that they're going to Google her and see that. I mean, it's just, those kind of things worry me. We cannot let just, the whim of the people be the way we govern ourselves. We have to have laws.
Yeah. Process. Yes, very good. How did you come to join the American Solidarity Party?
Well, the party's been around for about a decade. I'm relatively new. I came into the party after the 2016 election. And I came to the party because they were precisely what I was looking for the ability to vote my conscience as someone that is an adherent to the consistent life ethic, which means that I don't agree with making people dead from conception to natural death. So I'm opposed to abortion, embryonic stem cell research, physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, the death penalty. I believe that the only time it's acceptable to take a human life is when it is absolutely necessary to protect a human life. And even then, it's regrettable. It should never be something that we elect for, and it should never be something that's acceptable and legal to just electively do. Obviously, Trump versus Hillary was a major no-go for me. But I always called myself, in fact, I refer to myself as El Queso Solo, the cheese that stands alone, because I never thought that I would find a party that shared my values. I was always kind of freestyling, doing my own thing. And the last major party candidate that I voted for was McCain in 2008. And it just became abundantly clear that we had a problem when Mitt Romney was running against Barack Obama in 2012 and was campaigning out of both sides of his mouth. He was campaigning against abortion, and at the same time he had an ad saying, oh, but he supports abortion in the cases of rape and incest, and isn't the economy more important? Like, okay, you can't have it both ways. You cannot, hold unborn children ransom that, okay, vote for me because if you don't, the baby's going to get it. And you can't at the same time say, but it's okay if you want. It does not work. And I could not reward that with my vote. So even though I was disturbed at some of the things that Barack Obama was doing, in fact, I was part of I wrote an amicus brief to the Hobby Lobby case for the HHS mandate. So, I really had some problems with things that Obama was doing, but I obviously could not vote for him, and I definitely couldn't vote for Mitt Romney. And I ended up finding a protest vote that I wanted to make it abundantly clear why I wasn't voting for Trump in 2016. I wanted to make it abundantly clear why I didn't vote Romney in 2012. So I found a third party that is not aligned with my values. Very, very pro-life, like extremely pro-life to the point where they're even opposed to incremental changes and regulations. But they're very Protestant fundamentalists, so they're kind of gung-ho when it comes to the death penalty, which I'm very not. But I felt like, okay, if I vote for this person, then it just becomes clear that the reason why is because I do not consider Trump pro-life, don't consider Romney pro-life. And then I was so pleased when I found the American Solidarity Party, when I added an actual pro-life party, actual pro-life candidate to vote for that didn't believe in killing anybody. And also, as an added bonus, supported common sense rules when it comes to regulations to protect our government, to sustain life on Earth, because this is the only place that we can live. We kind of have to have clean air to breathe and clean water. We don't want to die of our own waste for single-use plastics, these sorts of things. So finding a party that agreed with me on immigration, on how our duty to protecting the dignity of the human person. And, it was so strange because, someone that, always considered myself, freestyler, this was a party that I did not have any disagreements with. And I never thought that could happen. In fact, until I became a Catholic, I never thought that I would ever, have any sort of institution that I agree with completely. So it really shocked me when I converted to Catholicism. I'm like, oh, hey, I'm actually on board with all of this. And a lot of, we're not, let me make it clear, American Solidarity Party is not theocrats. We're for freedom of religion, which means that we respect all religions and we don't impose any one. Otherwise, we can't have freedom of religion. But we are based largely on Catholic social teaching when it comes to safety net, economic protections, the rights of workers to a living wage. So I think the reason why I'm so on board with the American Solidarity Party is because they're based in Catholic social teachings, which I am completely on board with.
Right. Thank you. What is the symbol of your party?
We are the Pelicans. And I had to look up why. Then again, I'm like, why would anyone pick a donkey, right? So a lot of things don't necessarily. I remember when I used to teach government that there's a story behind that, and the story behind the elephant as well. The pelican has some very strong symbolism when it comes to Christian charity. And one reason why is because the pelican will feed her young based on, whatever, fish and whatever's around. If there's a drought or something happens where there is no food for her young, she'll actually use her beak to pierce her own chest and feed her children with her blood. And of course she dies, but the children live. And that's allegorical to those who are Christians in Jesus' sacrifice for us, the spear that pierced his side, how he bled for us for our salvation, so we could live eternally in our redemption. And so the pelican kind of reflects our commitment to our neighbor, our belief that we have a duty to protect others and to provide for others, not just ourselves.
It's very interesting and fitting, I think, for the party. That's very, very good. So in your view, how strong or weak should the state be?
I believe that it should. I'm a tenther to a certain degree. And the degree where that ends is that I believe that we have civil liberties, we have constitutional rights, the Bill of Rights, and we have, the right to equal protection. And anytime a state might be doing something that imposes upon those rights is when the federal government has to intervene in order for us to actually consider ourselves Americans. If the state can just do whatever they want, and some Americans in one state don't have the same rights as Americans in other states, then you see that we have a problem there. So the state should be as strong as it needs to be to reflect the needs and the desires of the people. We are very geographically diverse, and we're also very demographically diverse too, with our values. So what the majority, the public might want in the Pacific Northwest is not necessarily going to be the same thing as what's wanted in the Deep South, and vice versa. But it's important that we have the supremacy clause, and of course we can always litigate that in court to make sure that there's not overreach. But it's important that we have the state free to do what they need to do for the well-being of their citizens, but also the federal government free to step in for the well-being of its citizens. So that's the balance.
Okay, so some balance of power there, and some seems like very, very practical federalism. Is that a good way to say it?
Yes.
Rather than a strict federalism, like.
Well, another thing is because we have income taxes. That's not something that we've always had. That was something that came up later. We used to be able to support ourselves exclusively with tariffs and things like that.
Yeah.
But now that we have an income tax, a federal income tax, there becomes a responsibility with that money to distribute it in a way that is equitable, but also benefits the well-being and the flourishing and thriving of the entire nation. Things like interstate highway systems. Those are important for us to have interstate commerce. So, I mean, the role of the state is important for what they need to do in order to protect and advance the livelihoods and the flourishing of their citizens. But because we have an income tax, the federal government's also needed to determine how do we spend our collective money, because taxes are in many ways, well, it's coerced. I wouldn't say we're passing a hat around, everyone's just chipping in, because a lot of people wouldn't if you didn't have a IRS, they got a gun to our head. So it's not necessarily like, oh, we're all freely chipping in. But because we do have this collective pool of money, the federal government, it's their obligation to spend that in a way that advances the good of the entire nation and doesn't disadvantage any particular state or region, and doesn't advantage another state or region.
So how do you regard private property?
Private property is absolutely necessary to have any sort of justice or order. You can't have theft if something doesn't, if everything belongs to everyone, we wouldn't have any concepts of things like theft. I believe in private property. But I also believe that there are limits. When we talked about, ideas of monopolies and things like that, there are limits in that certain things are finite. If money and resources were infinite and just could be generated by anybody themselves without taking away from anyone else, that would be different. But because we do have limited resources, there needs to be some sort of check on individual ownership and hoarding of that. I mean, a perfect example would be common pool resource theory. Everyone knows the tragedy of the commons, right? Yeah, that allegory. Well, we got these public goods like fish, like wild caught fish. If we can't regulate fishing, then we will overfish and we will all lose that. We will all lose that resource. there has to be some sort of government stepping in and saying, okay, yeah, you have the right to private property, but you don't have the right to exceedingly amount of any particular good or exceedingly amount of money if that is bad for or at the expense of everyone else. It's a matter of justice.
You've already mentioned monopoly. Do you have anything else you want to say before we talk about capitalism?
What you getting at?
Oh, just like, do you have anything more you want to say about monopoly? You said you don't, you don't like it, but
well, no, okay, yeah. We have to keep an eye on natural monopolies. Yes, we have to keep an eye, especially when it comes to captive markets that are very easy to exploit. We have this idea of, oh, well, it's a free market. It's supply and demand, and let the market decide. Well, when you are the one supplier of a particular medication that someone requires to live, it's not necessarily that the people buying it value it at the level that you're charging, but that they have no choice. And is it morally acceptable to overprice EpiPens, to overprice insulin, and these sorts of things? And no, there isn't. Monopolies are problematic because they impose and impede upon people's ability to get what they need. They thrive on greed, but also they stifle innovation. When you've got one major group that has an inordinate amount of control over one industry, it becomes a lot easier to buy out and squash competition than it does to allow somebody that might have an improvement, might have a really good idea to come forth. And when I was thinking about monopolies, it reminded me of an episode of The Simpsons came out a long time ago. Can't remember exactly when, but Homer got a computer and he started a website, and it was a gossip website, and it got a lot of hits, telling, scandals for the mayor and other characters in The Simpsons. And the end is where Bill Gates, not really Bill Gates, Hank Azaria playing Bill Gates, comes in and says, hey, I can't really figure out what your company does. Rather than compete with you, I feel like it'd just be easier to buy you out. And so Homer Simpson's like, sure, yeah, let's do it. And he says, buy them out, boys. And they come in with these baseball bats, and then they just trash the entire place. Like, what are you doing? Didn't you just buy this? Like I didn't become rich by writing a lot of checks. I don't want anything you have. I just don't want you to interfere with what in the subtext is what I already have. I don't want you to compete with me. And I see that as something that can happen if we have unchecked monopolies. We don't have there's so many people that already have strategic advantages. But when they're able to use those advantages to further disadvantage other entrepreneurs, that's when we are stifling our own innovation and progress.
What is to be done about inequality?
I prefer concept of equity to equality. And, you're familiar with the difference, right? The idea of equality versus equity. Equality is, let's go back to the stimulus checks. Equality was that, everybody got the same amount of money in their stimulus check. So it was equal. Equity would be for those persons that lost their job due to the pandemic, or had some other major loss and was at a disadvantage because of it, to have more than those people that didn't need that stimulus check to begin with. And there's a cartoon that I like to show people when it shows, equality versus equity, and it's got a fence and it's got people watching a baseball game, and it, shows a tall person that can see over the fence, and then someone that can not quite see over the fence, and then someone that's even shorter. And then when you put equality is, okay, everyone gets their own little egg crate to stand on. Okay, well, everyone's standing on one. Two of those people didn't need it, they can still see the baseball game, and the third person would have needed 2 crates in order to technically be equal. That's the concept of equity. So my belief is not that, everyone has an equal shot at things. I believe that everyone should have the same opportunity, which is different than the concept of equality. And it's really controversial because it also kind of goes back to affirmative action and how we deal with race relations. Because, big argument that I've heard people make, and that, I used to make back when I was completely oblivious to my own racism, was, okay, yeah, things are equal now. We have equal protection laws. We have the EEOC. We have things like that, right? Like everything's like, it's fair now. And I'm like, yeah, it's not. I mean, you don't take, those people that have always had the ability, and their ancestors always had the ability to compete. And then you have one generation since Jim Crow that has been able to compete. And you really think that that makes up for all the years that they did not have those advantages? Do you really think things are equal, that we just magically were able to do that? So I prefer more the concept of equity, of, okay, what do people need in order to have a concept of justice? And in fact, one of my good friends in Canada has a problem in the Canadian climate of her wheelchair. She has mobility issues, and she has to have a wheelchair to get around, where the motors just get eaten up by all the snow that she has to drive through and things like that. And I assume that having single payer healthcare, not having insurance companies that make profits by denying people things they need, I assume that it wouldn't be that hard up there. But she had, was crying and so upset. She's like, okay, there was a storm here and it shorted out my wheelchair. I found a better wheelchair that didn't have the motor in a place where it was going to burn up. But here I am, like, I can't get anywhere, and I'm going to be stuck here like a sitting duck until I can fight this. And they're going to say it's my fault and I can't afford to fix it. And if that's the case, then so I mean, can you imagine how that must feel? How awful that was? Yeah. And so I said, I'm just praying it magically works. But it made me very mad. And she said, well, such is life. It's just how it is with wheelchairs. I'm like, no. You're very gracious. You're a lot more gracious than I am, because this is not an issue of, such is life. Yes, things are more difficult for you because you do not have the same ability to get around as the rest of us. Life is already harder for you. But no, when you have other people making it abundantly harder above that, that's when I get angry. And that's what's happening. I mean, there's nothing that we can do about, people that are deaf not being able to enjoy music the same way that hearing people can enjoy music, or people that are blind can't enjoy art the same way seeing people can enjoy art. That's one thing. We can't do anything about that. But when it comes to things that we can do to make sure that persons with disabilities have the same ability to do things that the rest of us do, I feel like that is an obligation. So I feel like any sort of disability accommodation should be a non-issue. There shouldn't be something you have to fight with an insurance company to get. These are the equivalent of her legs. Therefore, she should not have to fight for that. That, to me, is a better example of equity, because equality, she doesn't have equity or equality, really, when you look at it. But, should we be investing resources in someone that doesn't necessarily need them? Do we get wheelchairs for everybody if we get wheelchairs for her? Like, I don't need one. I'm really grateful I don't need one, but she does. That's more what I'm concerned about.
Okay, thank you. So to finish off, we're going to be talking about liberty. Is it defined as non-domination or non-interference? And how would we preserve liberty?
I feel like the idea of liberty is exploited so much by people that just want to do what they want. Like, oh, my rights to not have, basic decency, to keep my germs to myself during a pandemic by not wearing a mask over my face. I believe that freedom is not the ability to do anything we want, it's the ability to do what we should. And it requires a level of self-governing and restraint. Where if we want to be free, like it's not that I'm against masks, I just don't feel like, the government should force me to wear one. I'm like, okay, well then freaking wear it. The government wouldn't have to force you to wear it. If you did the right thing, this would be a non-issue. There wouldn't be a mandate if there weren't people out there losing their minds over this. So it's not so much, you're free if you're not dominated, or you're free if you're completely left alone. In fact, I don't feel like people can be free without a certain level of interference from the government, protecting their rights, ensuring, like I said, equity and justice.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, that's all I have. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, thank you. This has been really enjoyable. In fact, these are not questions that I typically get. I'm not much of a political philosopher. I am a political pragmatist. I've been working, passing laws, defending laws, since college. And I'm not considered much of an ideologue. In fact, I have problems with ideologies because I think that ideologies are for the intellectually lazy. It's a lot easier to just have like a cookie cutter belief system that tells you what to think, rather than looking at each issue on their own merits and coming to a conclusion on what you honestly think about that particular issue. It's a lot easier to just be told what you feel about something. Like, okay, well, what does my tribe think about this? What does Fox News say I should believe? Or, what does HuffPo tell me to think about this? So I'm not, I'm fiercely anti-ideologue. So I don't really have ideologies. I don't really have a lot of worldviews. I'm more looking at individual issues and coming to my conclusion about where I stand on those issues. But it is good to have some good, solid underlying principles that, okay, well, really, what do you feel like the ideal role of government is? Where do you feel like the state should be versus the federal government? So this was really interesting to think about. These were some questions that, like, I know how I feel about this stuff. I hadn't really had time to really think about it and define it as much as I did. So this was very, very enjoyable for me, and I really appreciate you having me.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck in November.
Thank you. Oh, I do want to mention that if anyone wants to know more about my party or my platform, it's Abernathy for